Hello. Hello. Good evening. There's so many of you. Yeah? Congratulations for sticking around on campus. Who's in, I don't know if anyone even could be. Is anyone here in first year? I don't know how that works, but that sounds amazing. Welcome, welcome. Good job jumping in ahead. Who's in second year? Cool. Who's in third year? Okay, a lot of you are in third year. Who's in fourth year? Cool. And hands up for the postgrads. Hey, look at that. See? Motivated postgrads. I'm really excited. I'm going to take a quick photo of you all. It's going to be so pixelated, don't stress. So many of you. I hope no one pulled any funny faces. So, welcome. My name's Hayden. Welcome to COMP6080. We kind of talked about this in the notice, but you know, there are 800 of you doing the course, and I think like tonight there's probably I think this room seats like 400 or something. So there's probably like a couple hundred people here. So like, congrats again for coming. Is everyone enjoying post-COVID life where you get to do things in person? Anyone kind of regretting being here and like I should have just done this at home? No? Okay, cool. So tonight should be pretty chill because we're mostly just chatting through the course outline. We'll see how much time we have. Week one historically is a lot of time just trying to establish what's going on in the course and how it works. Now, I also have this thing here. Has anyone ever seen one of these, the Hamper Emporium? No? It's not very exciting. So, basically, my day job is working in the software engineering space, building an app, basically. I work in the finance space. And as part of that, we work with a lot of companies who, like, we use their services, you know, like, say, like, Google Maps is like a company where other companies use Google Maps, right? Like, Uber and things like that would use that as a service. And we use companies as a service, and as part of that, because we're their client, a few times a year, they mail me and the other person I work with these boxes with like food and stuff in it. It's always kind of like really boring things. And I picked one up today from campus because we get it shipped to campus. And it's got this in it. Now, I don't drink beer. I also can't give this to you. I think I get in trouble. I don't really know how beer works, but I don't think I can just hand out beer bottles from what I remember reading about. But I do have some things for anyone who contributes greatly tonight. I have a bag of olives. Who likes olives? Okay, they're Kalamata olives. I have some beer nuts. I don't know what beer nuts are. I have other nuts. I have roasted capsicum tapenade. I have charcoal wafers, like those little white wafers that taste like that bread from church, but they're black, I guess. So anyway, that's all I have to give you tonight, but you know, we'll try and do better next week. So I haven't got the screen up, which is kind of a problem. We probably won't do much coding today, but that's okay because the way this course is structured is that we don't expect you to have learned much by this point because we're just getting started. Now, one thing we will talk about more in detail is the fact that this course lectures are on Wednesday or Thursday this term, and that's kind of different. Normally we run them on a Monday, and we've had to change a few things around for that because it's kind of later in the week than we're used to. Let me just check everything's good on the live stream. That could probably be bigger. Perfect. So, firstly, why COMP6080? Well, 800 of you are doing this, and like I get told term and term again that a lot of you want to do it. Does anyone here try and get in via the waitlist? Did anyone end up on the waitlist? Cool. Now, I can't fully understand why so many of you would subject yourself to 30 hours of me talking for a term, but you're here, and that means you're here for a reason. Does someone want to share with me why you're doing this course? There's always a few interesting answers. I know it's 6 p.m., but what's your name up the front? Yes.
Me?
Yes.
Tom?
Tom Hiko?
Yeah.
Cool.
Well, I'm going to use that at the job a lot.
You're going to use it at your job a lot?
Yeah.
Do you have a job lined up? Oh, you have a job lined up. Getting ahead. I like it. Does anyone else have a job that they have like prospectively or like upcoming that they're like trying to do this course to learn more about? Cool, that's good. What are some other reasons? Anyone here for things that aren't related to an upcoming job you have? Yes, my friend that just walked in. What's your name? Michael. Now, there's nothing I hated more as a student than when lecturers embarrassed me when I walked in late or left early. I had this one lecturer in like first year maths, and what he would hate people leaving his lecture. So if you got up in the middle of the lecture, he'd stop mid-sentence and just stare at you until you left, and it was horrible. But Michael, welcome. Why are you here? To learn how to build websites. Why do you care about building websites?
It's fun.
It's fun. What's fun about it? Don't worry, don't stress. I'm just having fun. Yeah, okay, so building websites are fun. So I guess a lot of what we do in the software space, particularly at uni, is often building systems and services. There was a question on the forum where someone said, where's the back-end engineering course? And I think I gave an answer that a couple of people saw, which is like a lot of what we do at uni is kind of back-end engineering, you know? Like the stuff you do in courses like 1531 or the Python course for postgrads 9024 or something, I can't remember exactly what it was. But all of those are kind of really building the foundations for services, whereas what we do with front ends are a little bit different typically. You know, it's an important topic. Now, I'm not saying this course is important. You know, this course more than any other course in CSE is arguably useless because you can probably teach a lot of what we're going through online. It's cool that you're doing this because now you're paying money, which means you'll force yourself to learn it. Whereas if you were to teach it yourself, you probably wouldn't do it for most of you, right? That's like me too. But whether you find this course particularly useful, whether you go do something on Coursera, General Assembly, at the end of the day, this matters, what we're doing here today in this course. And it matters probably more than most other courses. Not in a theoretical sense. There's nothing very theoretical about front end. There's nothing very academic about it. There's not a lot of top tier research going on in the space of JavaScript. But there is a lot of industry work. And in fact, as we'll talk about, most things in industry now are driven by front ends that we'll be talking about in this course and you'll be building. So what you're really doing is you're equipping yourself to essentially level up to have one of the most universal and important skills in the modern workforce, right? Because the modern software workforce is basically driven by a bunch of companies building systems with interfaces for people to use. Everything from Netflix to Facebook. Think of any company you use, any product you use every day. It's all like that. So a couple of stats here. A quarter of GitHub stuff is basically JavaScript. And there's another stat, in 2018, 1 in 4 job postings were for JavaScript-based frameworks. So that's essentially, a bunch of you have probably heard of React. That's like the hot buzzword, and it's the framework we use in this course. But you also might hear about things like Angular and Vue, and all of those things that form this kind of, the frameworks that are built on top of JavaScript. They are massively popular, and people are always looking for work in that space. Even if you don't find a job, I guarantee you could go on freelancer.com or something like that, Fiverr, all of those companies, and you could probably start making money after this course if you really wanted to, just by building front ends for people. I don't know what your hourly rate would be, but you could do it, that's for sure. Nothing is stopping you. Now, our objective in this course is within 10 weeks, I want to make you all confident in building your own simple web apps, and I want you to be able to build them confidently and quickly, and to build it in a way that it looks and behaves how you'd like it to be. And that's kind of the exciting thing about courses like this, and I think Michael touched on this, our inspirational leader up front. He was like, I want to build things that are fun, and that's the coolest thing. You get to see things in front of you or in your head and bring them to life in a usable way. What we will talk about is what is a front-end developer, and then a quick history of front-end development. A lot of contextualizing happening today. Let me just really quickly check the live stream. It's okay. It's not okay. See? That's what happens. Oh, what? I paused it, but now it's all good. Perfect. I always freak out. I get so excited with all of you in front of me. Sometimes I forget to unmute myself or something horrible with the live stream. And for the online viewers. Oh, they're curious about the beer nuts. I don't know. If you ask a good question, I'll mail you some fig paste. I don't know. Does anyone like fig? Does anyone see the word fig in fennel paste and think that looks delicious? I was about to hand it to someone, but I guess not. Okay, so what is a front-end developer? Someone who writes code that is executed client-side. Because, you might be thinking, what is it? You think JavaScript and stuff, but this computer here, without the internet, can run code and display an interface. Most of what you work with these days requires interaction with some kind of system or service. A front-end developer is someone who writes code that runs on the client side, on our side, on all those laptops in front of you, typically in a web browser. We say end-user facing product, but most of the time these days, it's in a web browser. And mostly, the languages we use are HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. We use HTML to build the structures of the page, CSS to style it, and JavaScript to make it dynamic. We'll talk a bit more about that in a sec. But fundamentally, front-end developers are really interested in people, and it's a common trait that I see a lot in front-end developers. People who come into the software space saying, I want to work on the front end, they more often than not are really interested in how people feel and how people interact with products. They kind of lean into the space of designers or product managers or product designers because they've got that interest in trying to make things real for people. It's a really human thing, right? Like you think about working at Google or something and you're in the YouTube team. There are people at YouTube who are designing algorithms for like network buffering efficiencies so that, like, you ever thought about, there's probably a team somewhere that figures out how much of your YouTube video to like preload? That little line that's like preloaded whilst you're watching it? It's like someone's thought really deeply about how much of that there should be, and it's based on costs and user experience and all this kind of stuff. There's like really technical stuff, and then there's the people trying to think about, like imagine designing Instagram or something. It's like, how does it feel as people scroll through it? What's the experience of hitting a like button? That's where all this stuff trends into. So, why COMP6080? Why front end? Web is exploding. We kind of talked about that. Front ends are important, but everything in front end now is basically web. It's all through a web browser, like 99% of it. But how did we get here? Because this course was not relevant 20 years ago, it wasn't super relevant 10 years ago, and it was like a little less relevant 5 years ago. So its relevance is kind of peaking. And I just want to kind of, give you a quick history run through. Really light stuff, because none of this existed, right? Like, not a lot of you were born before 1993, like a small set of you were, but it's all very new stuff in the grand scheme of things. So back in 1993, there was the release of HTML. Who's heard or seen of HTML before? Right, most of you. Right, I get that kind of hand that's like me. HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language. What does that mean? Most of you have done 1531 if you're an undergrad and you remember like Markdown, right? Anyone who's ever written a Markdown file, the .md files. It's not a programming language, it's what we call a markup language. It's basically something that like specifies the general structure of something, but you can't do loops and you can't call functions and things like that in it, So HTML was kind of like a markdown, if you will, for the web. And it was called hypertext because that was the word that we used to describe pages and documents that were getting sent around the internet in the new days. You think about Microsoft Word that's stored on your computer. You imagine the early internet and web browsers' job was to basically like upload your Word doc, so to speak, and then people could access it via a URL and get your page. And those pages used to be black and white text. But eventually HTML meant, great, now we can do some things like have some headers and bold and everything like that. And if you've worked with Markdown before, you kind of get it. That's what the web was in 1993, a bunch of crappy Markdown files on the web. That was the beginning of websites, just documents. Earliest websites were like Wikipedia. I like Wikipedia as an example because it broadly kind of has never changed. Like if you go on Wikipedia, what is it? It's like a URL, you access it, it loads a bunch of text. That's kind of the beginning of the net. Well, the web and browsers. Later in the 90s, in the mid-90s to late 90s, we saw the introduction of both JavaScript and CSS. Now, CSS was the thing that gave websites a nice look and aesthetic. It's what helped you create pretty borders and shadows and colors and shapes. It made it pretty. It made it not look like Wikipedia, but made it look like, I don't know what UNSW's homepage looks like these days, but there's really pretty web, like Apple's website. Who's been reading about iPhone 15 today? I know there's a few of you that haven't done anything for a couple hours this afternoon. You've been reading about it, but it's like you go to Apple's website and you're just kind of like completely flushed with beauty, right? And all those colors and movements and shapes and things. Like that's all kind of like a big part of that is CSS. But what CSS is good for typically is for kind of like the static color of things, like the static style of things. JavaScript was a language that's very similar to Python, and I know a lot of the undergrads in here, because of some changes I made in 1531 last year, JavaScript now. But JavaScript's just like a stock standard programming language like Python for the postgrads, except when you apply it to the front end, you can actually make the page do things like hide and show buttons, or you can make things slide across, and pretty much everything you use the modern web for is powered by this JavaScript. Like you think about using Facebook as a good actually. Is that like a dated reference by now? Who uses Facebook? It's like 3 of you. Okay. Instagram. Is that still too old? I've been told no one uses Facebook anymore. I don't use Facebook either. So you think about Instagram, right? And it's like all the things, the shapes, the layouts, that's all CSS. But when like you hit that heart button and it kind of bubbles up, or you like hit the like button, or you comment, anything that turns that page from something static and stationary to something alive and dynamic, that's all JavaScript. And obviously those two languages have come very far. Back in the 90s, they could do very basic things, but that's what they've always done, even if it was at a more basic level back then. And that's where the internet, as I wrote here, now things don't look terrible. So as you approach the end of the 90s, you start having websites like Wikipedia that can do maybe some basic things like pop up a box and hide a box, and they don't look awful. Where things started to get interesting, as far as I'm concerned, was like in the early 2000s, there was this introduction of a technology, which we do talk about in the course, called AJAX. AJAX stands for Asynchronous JavaScript and XML. I don't know what that means half the time. That's okay. It's asynchronous is the key word here. Basically what this meant, and this was quite important, was that typically, you go back to kind of Web 1.0, you would type in a URL and you'd load a web page. And that page would just load, like Wikipedia. But the problem was, if you wanted different content to be on that page, you would have to either refresh the page or go to another page. And what I'm really referencing here, and I know a bunch of you are like, who's under 25 here? It's like most of you, right? But I don't think you're too young. I'm like 30 for context, right? So I'm like a little older than you, but like not crazy older. It's like you remember back in the day when if you're on a website, you like maybe like your very first email account, you'd have to like refresh the page to get updates, Or like you think about like Ticketek or something, or one of these websites, I don't know, Ticketek's probably fine, but a website where you have to refresh the page because it won't just update for you. That was kind of everything on the web. So you think about the oldest versions of email you had to refresh to update. Ajax came along and said there's this technology where we can use JavaScript now, kind of underneath the hood on the website, to quietly talk to a server and fetch new information for you. And that's essentially where the beginning of dynamic websites came about. My earliest memory of that was Facebook chat, or like Messenger they call it. Because I remember before that, I was like mind blown at the idea that you could just load a page and you could send messages back and forth without having to refresh the page, right? And now you think about these very complex apps you use, like maybe you load Instagram in the web browser, you go and do a whole bunch of stuff without ever reloading the page. And that essentially started this trend of like, well, actually, as you can tell, what's actually happening on this story, and as we keep talking about, is that websites more and more start to feel like what apps always felt like. And if you're not sure what I mean by that, Microsoft Word, which probably everyone's used in some way, it's a very old application, and it runs as an app on the computer, like on Windows or on Mac. But Google Docs is something that couldn't have existed in the year 2000. The tech wasn't there for this kind of like live editing, sharing kind of craziness. And Ajax was some of the fundamentals of that helped that kind of live interaction. So all of that stuff, when you're working on a Google Doc with your friends and you're all co-working and typing and stuff, all of that's allowing that's essentially Ajax under the hood, or like, derivatives of Ajax that have evolved. So Ajax was really important to create a dynamic web pages. And, since we've had that, we've been able to do most of what we want to do with web pages for a while, making them super dynamic. But then two really important things happen in around like 2010 period, which was Node.js and TypeScript. Now, sorry, my throat's really messed tonight. I don't think I've talked in a while. Node.js was really important. It was a bit of an experiment with, like a lot of things in computing, it's just a bunch of nerds that experiment with stuff, and then eventually they're like, wow, this is cool. But up until 2010-ish, JavaScript was something that just ran on a web browser. It was only executed on like Google Chrome, Firefox, Safari. That was where it lived. That was its compiler, if you will. But someone turned around and said, hey, you know how you can run Python on the command line? Wouldn't it be cool if you could also write JavaScript and run it on the command line? Or just like C, right? Everyone in here has either written C and compiled it in a file on the command line, or they've written Python and run the interpreter on the command line. Node.js was just the JavaScript version of that. And again, the undergrads are familiar with that because it's in one of your courses. But that was quite revolutionary because it started to make companies it allowed companies to build a full stack application in one language. Because it was really tricky before that, because you'd kind of build your front end in JavaScript, and then you go build your back end in Python. Or you go build it in ASP, or you go build it in PHP, or you go build it in Java, or C++, or something like that. And there are a lot of benefits that came from using one language. Obviously, like you have more, like developers are able to more easily work between front end and back end, because they've got the common skills. You can import files into both the front end and the back end. That's actually one of the most common things that's super useful. You can go and like create a configuration file, or you can go and create helper functions and use those helper functions on the front end and the back end. So Node.js was like JavaScript on the back end, essentially. And the other one was TypeScript. We don't do any TypeScript in this course. You can if you want, but like we don't do it. We just do plain old JavaScript. But TypeScript was essentially, again, some nerds who took JavaScript and said, what if we put like C-style types on it, right? And again, I know half of you know what that means or have used that before. But these two things were important because they were big players in what made industry really get stuck into this whole kind of like JavaScript-based front end and web apps like this. Because Node.js meant you could build scalable applications in one language. So suddenly like you just had more and more resources and energy pumped in. And what TypeScript did was it started to industrialize programming in JavaScript, because typed languages are generally more preferred by industry because they're easier to demonstrate things are correct, obviously. So therefore it's like JavaScript is kind of old, like untyped language where you could get tons of runtime bugs. It had this robustness to it. And this really picked up the popularity. Another thing that happened, a lot of cool things that have happened, was the introduction of hybrid apps or apps like Electron, which were basically where, maybe you have a website like slack.com or Microsoft Teams.com. I don't actually know what the URL is for Teams, but let's pretend it's teams.com. You build a cute little app in teams.com, but someone said, what if we actually take like Google Chrome, the app on your computer, we take like a copy of it and we remove all that URL bar and all the everything about it. Literally everything about it except the actual web page part of it, just the window. And let's actually package that up into my own app, and in that window I'm just going to put Teams, nothing but Teams. So you kind of got this like, it's basically a Google Chrome browser that loads nothing but Microsoft Teams, and it looks like a real app. When I say a real app, I mean what we call native apps, which are apps like again, Microsoft Word or Microsoft Excel or some of these things you might have used when you were younger as well. And this was really great because there are apps you use all the time, like I think Discord, Slack, Teams, some of the usual examples. I know there's a few more that I've forgotten. Does anyone know of any cool apps that you'd like download and install on your computer that are just websites? YouTube? Oh, I've never downloaded the YouTube app. That's cool. YouTube. Did you have one?
Maybe the Spotify player.
Spotify player, yeah, I suspect that. You can kind of feel it if you, yeah. So probably Spotify, there's like a ton of them. And this was a huge revolution because like previously, if you were Microsoft 10 years ago, you'd have to build Teams.com in JavaScript and then go build like Teams, the Windows app in like some language or derivative for Windows, and then go build one in Mac. And you'd nearly have 3 teams. Like even at Westpac now, you'll often, I think, who uses Westpac? It's not a scary question. I do. Yay, cool, good job. They released their iOS update like a year before Android. As in like the iOS Westpac team pushed out their like new Westpac app way before Android did, because they were kind of building it for different, systems, like whole different teams, whole different code bases, right? So what this whole hybrid app thing meant was more and more companies now, like, say Spotify or Slack or MS Teams or Discord, they're just building websites that are the app, just websites. And then they are going and wrapping it in like a Google Chrome-esque thing and putting it on the Windows App Store, on the Mac App Store, on the Apple App Store, on the Android App Store, and on just the website, teams.com. So they have like one code base and one thing to maintain. And this is hugely appealing, right? Because you can deliver your software everywhere through like one language, essentially. And this is getting less chronological now, and these are more just kind of like facts. But the last thing that's been really, really pivotal is the introduction of what we call declarative frameworks. Now, this is something you will learn a lot about because your third assignment in this course is going to be using kind of like classic JavaScript to build a website, and your fourth assignment in this course is going to be using kind of new age modern web tech. It's very hard to describe to you what declarative frameworks are and why they're valuable in an intro lecture without you getting kind of playing around with them. But essentially, when JavaScript was designed and implemented for web pages, it's kind of like, the streets of Sydney. It kind of just happened before people thought about it too much sometimes, right? If anyone's ever driven around the inner west, you know what I mean. And it's like declarative frameworks were companies like Google and Facebook taking a step back and saying, what if we rethink how JavaScript works and we do so in a way that is angled towards how we build modern apps, where modern apps have a lot of like interactivity and managing state, and they're often kind of very game-like in some ways, and very resource heavy. A lot's going on with them. So they started building these languages, which it's not like a different language to JavaScript. We call them a framework because it's essentially a structure built on top of JavaScript. We'll talk about them much later in the course, but they've been also revolutionary because it means that it's even easier to code. So now what you have is you have all this web stuff that, because of Ajax, can now behave like a real application. Because of these frameworks, it's easy to code. Because of things like Node.js, you're incentivized to build all JavaScript kind of stack. So building web apps is even more appealing. Because of TypeScript, you can get some robustness to your app. And because of that other thing I forgot, Electron apps and other types of hybrid apps, you can now just code for the web and deploy everywhere. That's why everything's just like web nowadays. And that's essentially the background. So in the vast majority of cases, your native desktop applications, native mobile applications, web apps or websites can all be built now on a web-based JavaScript stack. It's just what that's basically what's happening nowadays. What does he mean by robust? I feel bad when someone answers a question and I don't know. Does anyone know what Coles is referring to? Sorry? I have no idea what you said. The icon? Of Coles? Yeah. What does that have to do with anything? Oh, okay. That's good. What does he mean by robust? I mean less likely to break. That was the comment about TypeScript. TypeScript means, and again, I know half of you have heard me talk about it before in other courses, but TypeScript means that you can catch more errors at compile time and less errors at runtime. So it means once your code starts running, you're more confident that things aren't going to go wrong. It doesn't mean that your code's less buggy. It means that you find the bugs before it ends up in people's hands more likely. So, any questions? Probably not. Does anyone want to ask a good question in exchange for olives? Yeah.
I don't want yours, but why don't we do TypeScript in the course?
Why don't we do TypeScript in the course? That's a good question. The short answer is that it's a lot to unpack. Funnily enough, like when we started this course, I had these meetings with a few different people from Atlassian and Canva and Google. We just kind of talked about the course conceptually and like what we thought should be in it. So it was kind of like an industry consulted beginning of the course. And I was actually quite keen on TypeScript to be introduced. And I got some like pushback, I think from particularly people from Google. And they were basically like, you think TypeScript's better because it finds more errors, but the problem is like you forget how many obscure errors exist and how like kind of much implied knowledge there is. And the other thing with TypeScript, and this won't mean a lot for a lot of you who haven't programmed in it, that it doesn't just like run in the web browser. Web browsers can run JavaScript, but like TypeScript kind of has to be like written over here and then compiled into JavaScript. So there's essentially overhead to it. It is a little awkward though, because again, for more context for everyone, undergrads used to do Python just like postgrads, but I moved our core course a year ago to JavaScript instead of Python, and we also teach a bit of TypeScript in that. So what it does mean is that a lot of the undergrads here, you might find things can feel like a little slow or silly in terms of you're like, well, we already did TypeScript in 153.1. Why are we ignoring it now? And it's like, we're ignoring it because you don't need TypeScript to understand everything in this course, Like, you can go learn everything and just add TypeScript on later. I know a ton of people that learn their entirety of front-end with JavaScript, and then you like teach them TypeScript, and it's like a bumpy few days for them, and then they're like, oh, I get this now. So that's the background. But if anyone else wants olives, I don't want to take all this home. So assume knowledge in the course. We assume that you know the basics of Git, the basics of HTTP and web browsers, and a high-level understanding of scripting languages, JavaScript or Python. If you don't have one of those things, we do have resources to help you. We'll talk about that soon. The course has no other assumed knowledge. You don't have to have any front-end knowledge at all, which is really good. I won't talk about the learning outcomes because it's kind of boring. I do need to talk about this thing that's like approach to teaching here. So this is a challenging level 6 course. Now, I don't say that because it's going to cause you misery. I say that because occasionally in my experience feedback, someone says the course was too hard. And I'm like, well, the course is the course. We design it to be useful and educational. And I say that because if you're someone who's looking for an easy course, this is probably not the place for you. It's not a place where we try and cause you harm or difficulty. It's not that we set out to be challenging. It's more of a disclaimer to me that's like, don't come in being like, I'd like something that's a bit breezy. Learning front-end's a little bit different. This is one of the only kind of important rambles I have. Front-end's a breadth topic. That means that you're like, there's this problem I've noticed teaching this so many times now, which is that because you're making user interfaces and you can see them in front of you, you know when you've gotten it wrong. Right? Like if we ask you to build something that looks like this or behaves like this, you know if you've gotten it right or wrong. And that's quite different to a lot of the other learning that you do at uni, where you might be doing something like designing a binary search or solving a complicated problem. And you think like, how many times have you thought your code is better than it is, but then when it gets auto-marked, it turns out worse? Right? Like that's happened to you before. That won't happen to you in this course because you're kind of going to know how you've gone when you submit it, because you can see the damn thing, And the reason I point that out is because what that does to students, from what I can tell, is it can send people on a bit of a negative spiral because, in most other courses, if you knew you weren't going to get 100%, you probably would keep going. And the reason you stop a lot of the time is because you think you've done better than you have, really, right? And then you get the mark back and you're like, oh, damn, I missed some stuff. Whereas here, you won't have that kind of ability to just kind of be like, I think I've done as much as I can. You will be able to keep going. You'll all know when you haven't kind of gotten 100%. And that can just be bad for some people because it just means that I just see them push themselves and push themselves. So just what I'd say to you is like, it's okay to not finish everything. It's okay not to do everything. You knowing what you haven't done might haunt you, but that's okay. Courses are not designed for all the students to get 100% in everything all the time, I was not a great student towards the end of uni, that's for sure. I was getting like 62 whams in terms and things like that, And I can still pay the rent, so I'm sure you can too. Our course site. We have a course site called Eccles. Why is it called Eccles? If you really want to know, I thought it was a cute name when I was 8 years old, and I've been looking for something to name after it my whole life, and I finally named it after this. That's literally the story. This is a website that I built a year ago, and there was the purpose of it. There were two purposes of it. One was like a small purpose, which was this is built with the same tech that you learn in the course. So like at the end of the course, you could build this, right? That's a cool thing. I've also released the source code. It's just up on GitHub. It's just public. You can go and clone this, I'm pretty sure, and run it. It's not really like, it just says hi. It's not really like elaborate. I think there's instructions somewhere. Actually, I don't think there's instructions. I probably should show instructions. But it's just like an npm install, npm start kind of situation. But I put it up there because it's like, I want you to be able to see it. If you do an assignment and you want to see how the course site's built, you can just go look at the course site. It's totally open and transparent. I want you to get excited that anything you see or you like or you think is cool here, you can go do too. It's not hard. I don't know how long it took me. I think a few days. I don't really remember. I did it over Christmas to avoid my family. It's like, oh, I got work to do. Just like the front end. But the other reason was that one thing that's really hard, I think, about the front end course, and I struggled with this for a while, is that it's not like a normal course, you just go and learn like 10 topics, right? Like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. But with this course, there's a lot of like, you learn this bit of content and then you can go do these 2 questions, and then you need to do those 2 questions before those 2 questions. And the course content, if you were to map it out on paper, it actually looks a lot closer to something that might resemble like a graph or like a web or a tree, you know, rather than just like a line. And there was a lot of things I wanted to do for you to make life easier. So for instance, if we go to the lectures page here, one thing that I was really keen on doing was people being able to, and I'm sure a bunch of you have seen this, was to be able to like tick one of these boxes. And this basically says like, what type of student are you? I want to do the bare minimum, or I want to work hard but not go over the top, or I want to learn everything. And then there's a checkbox for like whether it's basically a postgrad, undergrad checkbox, right? That bottom one. And that gives you different lecture content. So if you tick the I want to do the bare minimum, then you get less lectures to watch. But you still be fine. You'll still like learn all the basics. And if you tick this one, you get more lectures to watch. And if you're a postgrad, we give you a few extra lectures, and they're kind of labeled differently too. So some lectures are labeled mandatory. Obviously, I can't force you to do anything, but I'm kind of saying that if you do this, I'm confident you'll know enough. Some lectures are like recommended, as in like you probably should do it, but if you don't get to it, it's not the end of the world. And some lectures are extension, which is like you definitely don't need to do this, but you might find it interesting. And then other ones are catch-up lectures. They all have times, they all have slides. The other thing I wanted to do was that when a lot of students study this course, because we talk about a lot of different topics, like CSS and HTML and JavaScript and asynchronous programming and React and testing and user interfaces, you know, some people look at things like, what do I have to learn in week 3? But the other thing that happens when a lot of people study is they don't think about things by time, they think about things by topic. So they're like, well, what are all the CSS lectures and things that I need to watch, right? So you can kind of view these things by week or by topic. And then also, when you go to a particular lecture, it's not a very pretty website. If anyone wants to make it prettier, you can just go to GitHub and make a pull request. I'm not going to like decline it, unless you make it uglier, but I'm sure it'd be easy. No one's ever done that, by the way. If you do it, you get some olives. Yeah, some people update random things. Like some people will be like, there's the typo on this page, I fixed it for you. And I was like, thank you. But you kind of see the lecture here. But underneath, we show you 2 important things, which are like, here are the lectures that, if you watch this one, the one on the left with the red, we're like, you should watch this one first. And then the rest are like, these are the ones you can watch next afterwards. And then also, if you go further down, you can kind of see like, after you've watched this lecture, these are now the exercises that we think you can do. Right? So that was the main reason that I wanted to make this thing, because this is how I thought about the course in my head, so that it's easier to kind of like, if you ever need to jump ahead and be like, I want to learn about SVGs, I can see I don't really need to, but it's recommended. Hayden said I should watch this HTML fundamentals lecture first, and this is the exercises that will help me learn more about it. So that's the course site. Okay, just quickly jumping to the questions. How do I stop that? Okay, a few questions. So we don't need Moodle. Yeah, we don't need Moodle. Everything's on the course site. We will release marks of Web CMS 3, which is like CSE's equivalent of Moodle. And as Janet said, there's some catch-up lectures if you didn't do 1531, and there's not much to catch up on. Danny says, what do you think about the new TypeScript controversy? I won't lie, I'm not that smart and I'm not that great at computing compared to some people, so I don't know what they're talking about. I don't keep up with the TypeScript news. So if anyone wants to educate me, does anyone know what the TypeScript controversy is?
Some major project dropped TypeScript a few weeks ago.
Some major project dropped TypeScript a few weeks ago.
People discussing whether TypeScript is outdated or not.
That's so spicy. Cool. I've lost my lecture slide. It's here somewhere. Let me just go back to it. Sorry. So Goodness. Okay. Assume knowledge, summarize, blah blah blah. Teach course. Why was it built? We talked about that. Team. We got a bunch of great tutors. We got a huge amount of tutors. There's so many of you. There's like 800 of you. So we have like 25 tutors. They're really, really useful. Okay, so just quickly, in terms of assessment structure, there's no direct assessment in this course associated with lectures or tutorials. The assessments are due in weeks 3, 4, 7, and 10. It's most of the work. The exam's quite small. The exams take home. The exam's online. You can try and cheat if you want, but I'll probably find you for plagiarism. I give like 8 students 0 every term. Don't risk it. Like I'm jovial about it, but like, don't. Like, because we can give you 0 for the course, I believe, if it's like serious cheating. So, and also like, why are you here? You're paying money. Go save your money and go cheat quietly by yourself. You don't need to waste the money. Important notes about the course, blah, blah, blah. That's probably not that important anymore. A couple of... we do so many random things in this course slightly differently. I just need to touch on them. So, firstly... we have lectures in this course. We do 2 hours of pre-recorded a week on average, 2 hours of live lectures a week. Generally speaking, the live lectures come before the pre-recorded lectures. So like this week, it's like this lecture, and then what you do after this lecture is you go and watch these other lectures here. They're all pre-recorded. Then next week we have a 2-hour lecture, and then you go watch the pre-recorded ones, right? We found that's a nice balance. There are courses that have tried to pre-record everything. Students don't like it. I don't know, maybe it feels cheap or something. The idea of like turning up to this course and just being given YouTube videos. But live lectures as well, the problem with them is we can get really good high quality stuff by like pre-recording things because someone can really sit down and think about it and like deliver a little package. So these lectures will typically be more demos of what we're learning. We won't teach a lot of core fundamental concepts. So you'll be watching the pre-records to learn the fundamentals, and then we'll go and apply them in this lecture. The lecture slots for this course are on Wednesday and Thursday. Next week will be on Thursday. There's a commitment I can't avoid as much as I've tried. But other than that, it's like typically on Wednesday. Check the timetable. There's only 1 lecture a week. The lectures will be in person at least until week 4. Then I'll make an assessment after that. My problem with in-person lectures is that we miss the live chat. A lot of you stop coming. The screens, I don't know if any of you can tell, but the screen's like massively downscaled, right? So it's like it means that like when we code, it's actually harder to kind of learn because all the like browsers are really narrow and the code's really narrow. So we'll kind of see how that goes, but we'll definitely have some fun for at least the first 4 weeks. In terms of tutorials, actually, there's a line there I need to remove. Sorry about that. That's old because CSE is kind of getting back into person. But you can ignore this stream column. That found its way back into the course by accident. That needs to be removed. But every week we have all these tutorial questions. Each of these is like an exercise. And if you click on it, it takes you to GitLab because we run the course on GitLab. And you can go and complete it. What's important about this is that every tutorial we have, again, as one of 3 categories, which is like, compulsory is us saying, please do the darn thing. Refining is similarly like saying, we would recommend you do this if you feel like you mostly get something, but you kind of need to polish your knowledge on it. And then extended is, again, just extension stuff. These are all broken up into topics too. So you can go view exercises by topics if you'd like to. We also give some estimates as to how long roughly it's not really how long the question should take for maybe a first timer. It's more like if you knew what you were doing, how long would you spend? But if you click on one of these, the other thing you'll notice is that for every one of these, we not only have deployed to your GitLab repos the solutions for all the tutors, we also have these pre-recorded videos that were recorded last year by our wonderful tutors that you can go watch who stepped through it. Now, the purpose of this is to say that you are all adults and you don't need to be stage-gated where we kind of give you the tutorials and then we hide the answers from you so that like we hope you try it without looking at the answers. And then we give you the answers at the end of the week, right? That's like kind of a fairly typical thing. We're just like, here's all the questions for the term, here's all the answers, and if the answers don't make sense, here's a recorded video of a tutor taking you through the answers. So you have no reason not to understand what's going on in general. So that's super helpful. Then the question becomes, what are the tutorials about then? Well, the tutorials are covering questions that we've already given you answers to and already have pre-recordings for. That means a bunch of you who are quite either busy or don't like to leave the house or stuff like that won't want to go to the tutorials because you have it all in front of you. The reasons to go to the tutorials are you want to hang out with other 6080 students and have some fun. You just like to learn things, or you have specific questions, because the mandate to tutors has been, please do what your students ask you to do. Because sometimes the pre-recordings might not, gel with you well. Maybe you just prefer that kind of more interactive learning. There's lots of good reasons to go to a tutorial. We have a lot of them on. And so the tutors will do like whatever questions. There's no prescription is the point. They'll just do whatever the students will ask them to do. And if they don't do something you wanted to do, you can just go watch it online. Last point with tutorials. Sorry to kind of harp on about so many random things. We have a lot of tutorials, but what you'll notice is that a number of tutorials run at the same time, right? You've probably seen that. There's like a second tutorial at the same time. Reality is that a lot of you stop coming after a couple of weeks. You just stop turning up to your tutes. That's okay. So what we're going to do probably around week 3 is all of these slots here, we're going to combine them into one. So let's say that you're in one of these two here. And we'll send out notices about this, don't stress. We basically just take the 2 classrooms and we just say, all right, everyone that was in those 2 classrooms, you're now just in one of those classrooms with just one of the tutors. Right? There's no point running 2 classes with 6 people, because that's all that turns up by week 3, realistically. Why do we do that? It's actually so that we can take that money and we actually run more help sessions. So we have by far the most help sessions of any level 6 course as far as I can tell. We have tons and tons of them. So it's essentially just like a redeployment of funds we have in the course to make them most useful for you. I don't need to say much about help sessions. They're just help sessions. They're pretty prevalent in CSE now. And in terms of assignments, the first assignment's an HTML CSS assignment. It should have been deployed out to you just before the lecture. I'll check it after the lecture in case it didn't run out deployed properly. Assignment 2 is a really small assignment that does the basics of JavaScript. So it's essentially your first JavaScript assignment. It's really small. It's 5%. You have a week to do it. It's really quite small. And that's there to warm you up to assignment 3, which is one of the major assignments, which is building an entire website system with a backend provided, and you build that in JavaScript. That's a lot of 1990s JavaScript, a lot of it. And then assignment 4 is a similar thing. We give you a backend, and then you go write some HTML, CSS, and a bunch of modern JavaScript to build a web app as well. And this one can be done in a pair. When I say can be done in a pair, it's we've designed it for you to complete it with two people, in a group. But you can do it alone if you really want. But don't do it alone and then complain about the workload. That kind of annoys me, because it's a pair assignment. Most courses would not let you work alone. They would just be it's a pair assignment, we find you a pair. If you don't have friends, that's okay. I've not had friends at various points in my life. I get it, it's kind of peaceful, but it comes into problems. We find you friends. We have forms and we randomly match you up with people. So that's all right. Don't stress if you're looking around being oh my God, I need to find a pair. We can sort that out for you. Now, in terms of assignments, assignments typically have been due on Monday of week 3, Monday of week 4, Monday of week 7, Monday of week 10. Because the lectures are a little later in the week this term, everything's going to be due on a Friday. Just because there's a good example is that, a lot of the stuff that is useful for assignment 3, which is due in week 7, we cover in week 5. And when we used to cover it on the Monday of week 5, it kind of felt like the right amount of time to have everyone have 2 weeks. But if we're covering it on the Wednesday or Thursday, it feels a bit pushy. So all of you have longer with your assignments. I also try and release assignments early. Often I will release assignments before you finish your previous one. Please don't take that as a sign to have an anxiety attack. It's we do that not because we're be scared. We do that because we're saying to you we know some of you have finished early or want to look at this or want to digest it, so just take a look. If you need help, please go to the forum. If you don't know where the forum is, you can click on Eccles and it takes you to the forum. There's lots of great people. If you haven't introduced yourself, please go introduce yourself. We have this lovely forum post where everyone's sharing cute photos of dogs. Every time I'm having a bad day, I just go look at the. Isn't that sweet? I don't know what the best one is so far. I definitely liked. There was like a little. Yeah, that's my favorite. Who's that? Meizu? Are they here? Sad. I have a real thing for I like cats, but I don't like how they leave. Does anyone have a cat? Yeah, I like cats, but I hate how they leave hair everywhere. Because it's so thin, it just kind of catches everywhere, even though they're so cute. So I really like the cats with not much hair, the really ugly looking ones. I really want to buy. My friend has a cat. I don't know where I put my phone. It doesn't really matter. But my friend has a cat that's like a hairless cat, and I made it my phone background. It's inspiration. I know you can't really see it, only the people at the front. But it has a coat on. So that's my inspiration to get a hairless cat. That's just an unrelated point. If you can't get your question answered on the forum, go to a help session. And you can email me at cs6080@cse.unsw. Don't email me generally unless it's something to do with there's an issue you need to apply for special consideration. Basically, don't email me for anything that's a problem with the course or the content. Email me for something that's you've got you need to apply for special consideration, ELS issues, you have issues with your tutor, stuff that's just not related to the topics of the course. But just because otherwise it'll take me half a day to reply to you and say go post on the forum. And the reason the forum is better is because I read the forum too, and I'll still answer forum questions, and a tutor's probably going to beat me to it half the time, so you'll get an answer quicker. And if you feel shy or nervous, you can just make a private post. Every tutor can see your posts on the forum. I'm the only one who can see the emails you send me. That's basically the difference between that. In terms of getting set up for the course, one of the coolest things about this course is that it has the easiest setup process in the world because, at least for the first 7 weeks of the course, the only compiler you need is Google Chrome. Who has Google Chrome on their computer? Who doesn't have Google Chrome on their computer? What's my friend in the
I use Firefox.
Firefox?
Yes.
I used Firefox for so long and I loved it. And I was I won't go to Google Chrome. And then I used Google Chrome one day and I was oh, it is a little quicker. So I appreciate the love for Firefox. That's good. Firefox, it doesn't matter. You don't have, we say in the course that we test stuff on Google Chrome, but I'll be honest with you, as someone who's been programming on the web for a long time, the whole browser compatibility thing is kind of over. Back in the day, there used to be so many crazy problems with browser compatibilities, where things would look totally different with the same code. That doesn't really happen anymore. So we say you need to code in Google Chrome, but when I code it, I mean run your code in Google Chrome. You don't need to. You can run it in Safari or Firefox, but do check it in Google Chrome when you submit it, just in case there's some weird issues. But that's the best thing about the course. There's no real setup. You probably need to set up Git if you don't have Git on your computer. Again, I know 1531 students have that. For the postgrads, if you haven't been familiar with it, you can go and... I don't remember where we link it. I don't know if we link it on here, or if we just I think it's in More Help, installation, resources, Git. I've kind of forgotten. I know we linked it in the notice. I can't remember where it's linked on the course site. There's a bunch of other things we've added this term that I haven't even talked about. We've built this entire style guide for students because a common question was I know we talk about style in lectures, but can I see it written down? So we have a style guide. It's just got HTML and CSS at the moment. I'm finishing these two up over the weekend because they weren't urgent because you're not going to interact with that for a while. But yeah, you can see information about installation here. Obviously, if you see issues with it, you can point it out, or you can put a pull request in if you're feeling really generous, but you can just tell me about it. That's the main thing. So you're all set up, ready to go. I'll tell you a quick funny story about browser compatibility, just because I feel like I'm giving you a lot of boring stuff. So here's some interesting stuff. Browser compatibility. Back in the day, what used to happen was that you would write some code, and I know we haven't, done a lot of, like, there's not really much coding that we're doing here tonight, but it's like, you might go and create like a box. Like imagine that you have some kind of box on a website, right? This is just a text editor. What used to happen was that if you put that box within another box, sometimes you would go and say something like the inner box here, this thing, you'd say I want it to have like some padding in it, some like white space added to it that was like 10 pixels. And literally certain browsers would go and put that 10 pixels on like different sides of the border of the box. Like the interpretations were crazy because you got to remember web browsers are like compilers. And if you've learned anything about compilers and programming languages, it's like people go and define programming languages. It's a bunch of rules about code. And then compilers read those rules and try and have that code exhibit the behaviors expressed in those rules. And that's why you sometimes get variances of how things work. So there was a lot of that back in the day. And I interned at Microsoft a long time ago. And I think my manager's manager, by the way, this guy, funny story, my manager's manager at Microsoft was basically blind. And I remember he earned so much money. It was like $1 million a year or something crazy. And I just remember can you imagine being so smart that someone pays you $1 million if you're blind? You know, I feel like if I was blind, I couldn't do anything useful. But that's how smart this person was. And I was talking to him, and he was like, I used to be the lead, the VP of testing, the head of testing for Internet Explorer 5 or something, a long time ago. And they were saying that one of the problems was that there used to be this web browser called Netscape, and Netscape's really old, it kind of died off. It was kind of one of the big first popular browsers, and they said that Netscape had 80% market share or something. Most people use Netscape in, I think, around the 90s. And when they were introducing Internet Explorer to compete against Netscape, Netscape was implementing all of the HTML and CSS wrong. They were basically implementing the standard wrong. Everything was just not rendering how it should have been. So they said they went and, in Internet Explorer, they went and built it correctly so that HTML and CSS displayed properly. But what happened was all the engineers had basically started writing intentionally incorrect code to work Netscape properly. Basically to hack Netscape so things appeared right. So Netscape would try and display the right things wrong, so they tweak it all to shift it back to normal. So then when it tried to work properly on Internet Explorer, it looked the wrong way. Basically. So they were then they had to basically introduce bugs into Internet Explorer in the early days so that things would look properly based on the code that people were writing that was intentionally not right. And they were explaining that was one of the earliest problems that was introduced into Internet Explorer, which is why it gets such a bad rap and why it basically displayed web pages poorly for such a long time. We do use GitLab. If you have any issues with GitLab, please just post on the forum. I won't take your time with it because 90% of you figure it out, and for those 10%, we've told tutors in help sessions and stuff, prioritize anyone who's struggling with GitLab. And so there's some resources, there's a style guide. That's a really creepy looking emoji, I never thought about that. But if you do have any feedback, you can go to this form here, and you can go share your thoughts with me. The only thing I'd ask is it's optional to share your name because it's an anonymous form, but I love it if you do share your name because what happens sometimes is people give really bad feedback and I have to put it in the bin. Here's a good example. If you give me a piece of feedback that says the assignment was really hard, I'm just going to ignore it because I have no idea what to do with that information. You know what I mean? I'm like, great, I know it's hard. What do you want me to do? I don't know what actually was hard about it. I want to talk to you about it. So either be really specific or share your name so I can find you and email you and no, I'm just kidding. Just ask you some questions. That would be really helpful. And also, it's also great if ever you're giving feedback, and this is true from my experience at the end of the course, this is true for the feedback form, tell me your experience with it. I think where I notice some feedback can go astray is when students are this is wrong, it should be that way. And it's I don't want to hear about, you can, but I'm saying your opinion about what should change is not as useful as understanding how it affected you. So some students will say TypeScript should be in the course. And I'm again, I don't know what to do with that. But if you kind of talk about TypeScript not being in the course was really hard because I was really passionate about learning it. It was something I was so interested in, and I felt like the course had no resources, and it was just kind of tiring trying to figuring it out myself. I'd be oh, okay, I understand you now. I can help with that. So helping me understand how you feel is really important. This slide feels a little bit redundant because usually 6080 students never give me any issues. But just be nice to each other and your tutors. Honestly, all of you seem like a bunch of nice people, even if you don't want any olives. But that's okay. And so normally I kind of wrap the first lecture up early, but I think what I like to do is just take a quick 10-minute break. Let's go take a break till 7:20. And then I would actually like to demo a little bit of web page building today. But I'll be clear, the web page building, we know you haven't learned anything yet, right? So we're just kind of showing you for fun to give you a visual sense of what's coming up. And then next week we'll do a bigger demo where we're we know you know this stuff now, so let's go hard with it. So take a 10-minute break and we'll get started back up at 7:20. Hello. Hi. Hello. I just catching up on a few questions that kind of came up right till the end. Nam has said, can you make a dark theme, dark mode for the web course? We could. I might get around to that eventually. But if anyone would like to make a dark theme, honestly, if someone emailed me and was like, can I do like 10% less of an assignment and like help make the course, the website dark mode or something, I'd probably be like, okay. Just like as long as you're learning stuff, I'm generally pretty relaxed. Will the knowledge from this course help us with transitioning into mobile app development as well? Oh, that's a brilliant question by Fake Olive. You know, it's funny, I was like when you teach, you're like, you know, I should acknowledge this person, it makes them feel important, and just like Fake Olive. It's funny. Will it help us with transitioning to mobile app development? Maybe like 70% yes. Like, you know, mobile app development is a funny thing. Basically, like, we don't do much mobile app development in the course, but there's basically 3 ways that you build mobile apps these days. The first one is that you build it like a website and you package it up like a website, like, you know, we talked about Spotify, right? That's that Electron hybrid app way. Then on the opposite side, you have your native application. That's where you'll hear about things like Objective-C in the old days, or Flutter, or gosh, there's another. What's that? Does anyone know that language? Sorry. Swift, thank you. Who said Swift? Do you want the olives? Yeah? Woo! Okay. I'll just like awkwardly throw them in this here. Oh, good catch. You really compensated for my mistakes there. I actually told my friend I had olives from earlier. He's going to be upset. That's okay. And then there's like native apps, and that's like, you know, Swift and Flutter and Objective-C for iPhone, and for Android it's all kind of Java-based. And that's usually only used for like really serious applications. And then there's like technology in the middle, which actually Flutter might be one of them. But the most common one that I work with is React Native, which is essentially, it's like, the best way to explain it is it's like JavaScript that, it's like React and the stuff you learn in the course, but it's a slightly different language. And what it does is it's essentially behind the scenes. It takes the JavaScript or the React you write, and it kind of converts it to iOS and converts it to Android. So you code it in like React in one place, and then it kind of ports it. If anyone's familiar with video games, you often hear about, like, you know, they've ported this game to another console. It's like, you know, you kind of have the same thing, and it's just like a conversion process. So it does help a bit. I have mused about putting more stuff in the course. I'm still musing about it. You can't just jam things into the course, because then people cry. Not in like a bad way, like in a reasonable way, because there's just too much going on. Is there a lecture tomorrow? No. Go look at the lecture timetable on the course website. What is wrong with me? It tells you if it's not here, we're not doing a lecture. So go check that. Can we pick our partner for the assignments, even if they're not in your class? Yeah, I don't care what class you're in. You can pick them. That's totally fine. Can we do 6080 on SSH, or do we need to switch to local? As in like VLab, SSHFS. It's probably, you could probably do 6080 on VLab, but it would be an actual nightmare. I'm a big VLab fan. I love VLab. I think like I encourage first years to use it, because I think first years can sometimes get obsessed with like local setups and stuff, and VLab's fine. But that's because certain languages and tools can be really hard to set up locally, and there's all these obscurities, and it makes it hard to debug. But honestly, this is like the best course to work locally, because I'll show you in the demo, it'll make sense. Fan had a good answer. Thank you, Fan. And Samuel, will we look into SSL in the course? No. We don't do much with security, mainly just because there is a web application security course. I don't remember the exact code. It's 6.8 something. 6 what? 6841. 6841? Yeah. 6443. Oh, that's the advanced security, which is cool to do as well. So yeah, like on the security course, you have your intro to security, and then after that, I think you can do your 6443, something like that. Thank you. So, what's your name? Rhythm? Oh, hi. I saw you. Oh, that's right. Awesome. Nice to see you twice today. So would the timetable be wrong since it shows 2 lectures today? Yes. Don't read the UNSW timetable. Just read what's on the course website. Same with tutorials and stuff. Don't read the tutorials on the UNSW timetable. Read what's on the course website. Okay. Now, for our last 25 minutes, I want to show you the basics. This is the easiest demo in the world. I have a text editor open here. This is actually an example of an editor that is not built. This is actually a natively built editor. As in the person who programmed this is just sublime. It was, I don't know what language it was written in, but it was this version of it was written for Mac OS specifically. Whereas who uses VS Code? I'm pretty sure that's built in JavaScript, from what I'm told. Maybe that's wrong, but I'm pretty sure it's built in JavaScript. So that's why VS Code. So someone's probably written VS Code once, and then it just runs on both, Mac and Windows. So I have this file here. Just checking I unpaused it. I have this file here called myfile.html. It's just a blank file, and I can put text there. It says, hello, Hayden. And here's the thing. When we talk about the web browser being a compiler, I have saved this file here to a folder on my computer called Hey Team. It's just a random folder, just in Finder or on Windows Explorer. And I can literally take that file and drag it into my web browser. And this is the equivalent of a web browser compiling my source code, which is here, into something visual. But obviously right now it's not much. Now, even if you don't know any web programming, you've probably seen some basic HTML like bold tags. If I save that file, and I'll start putting these side by side, if I refresh the page, the text now goes bold. There's a few of you who are like quite mind blown by this. It's really sweet. Technology, so cool. So it says, hello, Hayden. And here's the distinction. So it's like the web browser is rendering this, but if you right click on the page and you go view page source, you will see the source code that the browser is rendering, which is the same as the file, right? So like this is a file, and the web browser opens the file, it's aware of the file, and then it takes that, which is source code, and it compiles it, except it doesn't output machine code, it outputs pretty things on the page that you can click on. That's the course. We're just going to go learn harder stuff now. And right now it's loading on the file system, and when we talk about websites, websites are just this, except instead of it being on the file system, it's on the internet, and you use a URL to like grab it off another server's file system somewhere else in the world, and that's the whole thing. So yeah. Now HTML, you'll see all this in the pre-records. So normally in the course I don't say much about it this week, and I say go watch the pre-records, and then we like talk about it next week. But I'll be pretty light on it. HTML is the structure of a page. You'll see in the pre-recordings that we talk about all HTML pages have this structure. This also might mean that you can skip through the HTML fundamentals lecture because we're kind of covering a bit of that. Every page consists of these tags. Every HTML tag, mostly, some don't, has an open and a close. It's like a lot of things you'll see. And all of the stuff that comes up on the page, all the visual stuff is inside the body. And when I write hello here, it comes up on the page there. The header, or the head section, is used for a whole bunch of other stuff. The most common and fun one that you'll see used is the title. And the title is, it's hard to see here because I have a bunch of tabs open, but the title is this thing here. Right now it says myfile.html, whereas if I change that to a poo emoji, and I do that, and I refresh my page, it's now poo emojis. That's what that title is. So a basic HTML page will have, head, and there's a bunch of stuff in here. You go very deep into that, but it's got a title element here. But beyond that, that's a very, very, very basic structure, and what you think about when you write HTML is all the stuff that exists inside the body tag. You'll see that I'm indenting here. I generally, with web, try to use two-space indenting. It's something that I've picked up on a lot of, and that's mostly just because with two-space indenting, there's a lot of indenting in web. So we have our body there. and we have our page, and then I can go and write things. And there's lots of HTML components that we have. Like we can create a level 2 header. Level 2 header is just a header that's like the second biggest header. And then we can, that could be a level 1 header, or it could be a level 3 header, or a level 4 header, or a level 5 header, or a level 6 header, or a level 7 header. That doesn't exist, it's just 6. So you have lots of different headers, and there might be the question of like, wow, how does it decide what that looks like? Well, that's actually just part of the HTML standard. So the HTML standard would say something like, the H1 to H6 tags represent headers of various sizes, where H3 is the third biggest header and the fourth smallest header. How that looks in different web browsers could be slightly different. I haven't read the standard, but that's what is there. We can go and create other things if we'd like to. We can go and use the image tag. And this is where, we start to introduce attributes. We cover this more in the pre-recorded lecture, but essentially lots of tags have opens and close, but they also have a series of attribute, key value pairs essentially. And this key value is source, which you then give it an image. So for instance, this up here is an image. I can copy that image and paste it here. And I don't know if there's a YouTube text there. Maybe I can, I'm not sure. Maybe the YouTube text is white. But what we can do is we can go and paste that image here, and then that will load it onto our web page, right? So we're essentially saying that, hey, there's an image tag, which is saying I want an image to be here, and I'm specifying properties of that tag, which in this case is the source of that image, another URL. Typically when you build websites, you don't go and find random images from YouTube and put them on your website. Typically you use images that are on your own website, So you'll have HTML pages on your website, and you'll also have images on your website, and you'll be using those images. Just like YouTube here, and you start to understand how the internet works. Like you can kind of see here, YouTube as a company, their image, which is actually an SVG, which you can go learn about in the pre-recordings, is actually coming from a website called gstatic.com. What do you think the G stands for? Google, right? Because Google owns YouTube. So Google's clearly got this weird thing going on where they have a website called gstatic.com, and then you think, oh, I'm onto something. And we won't get anywhere. Google's like, don't come near me. But this is clearly a website they have. There's probably something, it's probably a CDN or something that to do with efficient caching or Lord knows what. But they're clearly hosting a lot of static content there. Basically images, I don't know what else. A lot of images on the internet are static. Cool. What else can we do with HTML? Does anyone have any favorite tags? It's a weird thing to ask, but it's a weird thing to answer. You can answer it though. You won't be weird, I promise. What about italics? That's fun. There's a lot. There's literally 2 pre-recorded lectures on this. There's the basic tags and the more advanced tags. But that's HTML. You get into more detailed stuff, like in HTML you have the old concept of a table where you create a table and then you have a table row and then there's a cell within that table. And this is how you can create say numbers. So say I want to create a table that has 2 rows with 3 columns. So I create 2 rows and then 3 columns and it looks like that. So now I have this little table down here. And then there's other attributes you can give, like in HTML you can give things borders and stuff like this. So this again, everything I'm showing you here is that real 1993 internet. That Wikipedia V1 internet, where it's all HTML. And what a lot of this is structure. So how they used to, structure really old web pages was sometimes your web page would actually be a table where the nav bar and the sidebar was one column of a table, and then the other side was another column. So your page was nearly a 2-column table. And there was all these kinds of interesting hacks and things that people use to, change pages and stuff like that. And it's really hard to do a lot with just plain HTML. Now I don't remember how much of it I added to the pre-recordings, but in the early days before CSS, a lot of the properties used to be within HTML themselves. So if you had a paragraph of text, hello there, how are you? And inside that paragraph of text, you wanted it to be a different color. What you actually typically did was you actually wrapped this in another tag that said font color is red, like this. And there was actually a font tag. Now, that still works, but as far as I remember, it's been deprecated. which means that, let me check actually, look it up. HTML font tag. Not supported, okay. So there's different versions of HTML. And I don't know I don't know if we're still on 5, but every time they come out with a new version of HTML, there's more cool things that can be done. You know, so HTML5, I remember when it came out, they were like, you can now include video and audio on your web page. And that's in one of the pre-recorded things. We kind of show you how you can include a video on your web page. But this font tag is no longer supported. Why does it work in the browser? Does anyone have any ideas if it doesn't work? Someone mumbled. You're funny how you mumble stuff. I got nowhere to be tonight. No, come on, give me something. It's not a trick question. Yeah? Backwards compatibility. How many of you were thinking that but didn't want to be bothered to raise your hand? It's a funny question. Yeah, okay, good, you get it. You get my humor. Backwards compatibility, because there's all these websites out there that use stuff like this. And it's like, why break them, you know? Sure, it's not supported, you shouldn't use it. But if websites use it, why should Google Chrome suddenly break old websites? There are old websites out there. Does anyone here do security or done security? Like 6441, 6481 stuff? There's a couple of you. I don't know if I can still find it, but there was like Richard Buckland, who does the security stuff. He used to have an old website. I don't know if I can still find it. And it was like, yeah, I remember it. I always used to use this example of a website that looked like it was built in, like 1995 or something. And you can actually see it. It actually definitely looks like it is, because if you actually go look at the source code for this, you actually notice a few things. It's definitely changed since I last kind of had a giggle with it. But like some things you'll notice are like, this website has open tags for P, but it doesn't actually close them. You see at all the end of these lines, it doesn't actually close. It's just like opening. And there's a lot of things that browsers are actually really generous and understanding when it comes to like how you write HTML and CSS. Like they'll kind of be very forgiving. Like, you know, the standard requires you, for instance, to have all these like head, body stuff. Well, watch what happens when I get rid of it and I just have plain HTML on the page. Browser's like, that's fine. I don't know what happens if I get rid of that. That probably won't work. See, it's still I'm literally breaking the syntax here, and the browser's kind of figuring it out. If I get rid of all the closing tags, I don't know if that will work. Get rid of all the closing tags, browser still figures it out. Right, so this is the browser stepping in and seeing incorrect code and saying, I'm not going to punish you. But all of that aside, that's some basic HTML. I won't add all the head body stuff back, because like even though you should add it, it just takes up screen space. We could take that further. It's the structure. If you're not sure what I mean by structure, it's like when you build a house. Before you paint it, before you decorate it, you've got to put the roof on and the walls in and put all the wood in and the foundations, right? All the pretty stuff is built on top of that structure. It's built on top of it. It couldn't exist without the structure, but the structure itself does not make you smile or bring you that joy or that kind of creativity. So, where CSS came into the picture was that someone said, how do we make things look nice? And they said, well, I'm going to create a new tag called style. And inside that style tag, we're going to use a new language. So the style tag itself is an HTML tag. But what we put inside that HTML is not HTML, it's CSS. And CSS is a very simple language. I'm only going to show you a little bit because you'll see more of it in the pre-records, and then we can go deeper into it next week. But one of the most common ways it's used is that you put a hash and you create a name, such as, oh, where's Mitchell gone? Did he just disappear? So sneaky. I love that. In and out. Got things to do. I like busy people. So in honor of Mitchell, our fallen comrade, what we're doing here is we're creating a name that has properties. So we're basically saying Mitchell is a word that describes a bunch of stylistic properties. And one of those properties, for instance, might be color is red. And now what happens is on my P tag here, which used to be red, right? Remember when I used to have that font tag before? now it just says P, is what I actually do is I say PID equals Mitchell, and by giving the paragraph a name of Mitchell, what like this, and this is the this is like you're halfway to understanding everything about HTML and CSS here. The HTML says my HTML element's ID is the string Mitchell, and the CSS between the HTML style tags up top, that gives an instruction that says, hey, anything that has an ID of Mitchell, I want it to have a color red. And you know what? I also want it to have a font size that's 2 times the normal font size. And you know what? I also want it to be font family Arial, because Times New Roman looks kind of dumb. And now it looks like that. You know, so now we're painting. You know what I mean? Like this is why it's called, like CSS stands for cascading style sheets, and we are styling our page. We are adding life and color and vibrancy to it. And we can do that with everything. So for instance, let's imagine here my YouTube logo. There's this HTML tag that you learn about in the pre-record. It's called a div. And a div is the most basic block element. It has no properties. It's like a blank canvas, right? Like if you think about an HTML, like because every HTML tag has some kind of inherent property. Like an H3 is kind of big text, you know, and a paragraph kind of has padding above and below it. But a div is like a real blank canvas. It basically has no meaningful properties. So it's what you kind of use when you have like you basically want to draw an invisible box around something and then paint it with CSS. So here a div, I'm going to now give that an ID of, hey rhythm. Is your name spelt like the word? Okay. Yeah, we'll just, we won't be invasive. So, oh no, you survived? Yes. That's good. We nearly lost the laptop up the front. So we've now got another ID called rhythm, which we give to this div. And you notice I'm nesting HTML elements. I can put them inside one another. That was probably already clear. And what do I want to do with this? Well, I'm going to give it a background of black. Oh, it was there all along. Wow, isn't that exciting? So that's actually, and you go back to YouTube, that's actually what's happening here, because YouTube, the YouTube Studio that you use for live streaming, its background is black, so the image that's being loaded there is actually a red icon with like white there. But when we tried to render that on our page, because it's white, we just couldn't see it. So now it's like, you know, we put a black background there. So that's kind of cool. You can add other elements. For instance, like, what's something that's a little upsetting about how that looks? It feels a little claustrophobic, you know? Like it feels like it's not breathing. So we can go and add padding to all 4 sides of the box. We can go add padding to the top, left, bottom, and right. Like that. Well, that feels a bit nicer, doesn't it? Feel a bit more relaxed. I do. Then you think, oh, it still feels kind of sharp. So let's go and add a border radius to it. Where the borders, like a border radius is basically, you can imagine like 2 sides of some kind of object. They come into a corner. And when we say we want a border radius of 5 pixels, that means count 5 pixels out from the corner, like in both directions, and then draw a curve between it. That's what a border radius is. So we could put a border radius there, and it's kind of hard to tell. Maybe let me make it bigger for you. But now we have this like nice border radius. Feel calmer again, you know? And we can kind of take that further. Border radiuses, you can give it a theoretically infinite number, but like it'll max out at some point because you can't make those circles any, you know, bigger. Anxiety actually is increasing again. We should do that. You know, so this is CSS. CSS is that, again, you're painting. There's this, at the high end of CSS, you can do some really interesting things with like animations. Like the modern CSS that exists, advanced CSS animation demo. So like over the last 5 years, CSS alone without any JavaScript has been able to do some genuinely wacky stuff. I'm just Googling this randomly. Like this one here is like, yeah, like this is weird. Like CSS can kind of do this weird stuff here. Just with this kind of like transform, scale X, like there's like a lot of stuff here like I don't really know. I haven't done a lot of this myself. Spinners created with just CSS. Like there's really advanced stuff at the far end. Generally, like most of the time, you're not going to interact with this. Like even like, let's take a company like Canva, right? A company that like, you know, a design company that mostly builds stuff in the front end. Most of their employees on the front end wouldn't like be experts at this stuff, but they probably got a few, like a small set of people on staff whose pretty much full-time job is just to do very advanced things with CSS, I'm sure, So CSS can get quite complicated. I don't want to, like when I say it's static, I don't want to say it in a way that like tricks you into thinking it can't do anything cool. It's just the cool stuff it can do is it's usually more complicated, it's on the bleeding edge. And most of what you're going to be doing is this kind of static stuff. Now, again, there's lots of, like I could stand here and show you that there's faster ways to write this, but it's all in the pre-records. But that's CSS in a nutshell. That's what it can do. We could do more with that. We could, we could wrap all of this in a div called page if we wanted to, and then nest all this. And then we could give page CSS, we could give it the font family so that the whole page is now Arial if we'd like it to, and then all of the properties there inherit it. Because that's like one thing about HTML and CSS is they're blocks, right? It's layers, it's blocks and blocks and blocks. There's a lot of inheritance going on. There's a lot of hierarchy going on, and everything generally, and like not everything, but it mostly inherits properties from above it, particularly stylistic properties. Not so much things like padding, but things like colors and stuff. Now, I'll give you an example of another HTML tag that used to be really fun. It's my favorite tag. I always like to talk about it. It's the marquee tag. Who's heard of the marquee tag? No? Okay. So, marquee tag was basically this tag where what happened is that for the full length of its size, it just like runs that across the screen. And I'm pretty sure that's deprecated. I don't remember. It's deprecated. Very sad. And then there was like another one called Blink that I used to love demoing. Oh yeah, there's so much in the old Blink. This one was funny. I don't know if it still works. Maybe it doesn't. So, unless I've done this wrong, this might be an example of a deprecated tag that the people who are developing web browsers are just like, I couldn't even be bothered making this happen still. What you'll notice about a lot of these old tags like marquee and blink and font is that the original versions of HTML before CSS came along, they had to style themselves, right? They had to have these capabilities within them. So before, when I said like font color equals red, that wasn't CSS. That was HTML technology there that was making it red. And CSS over time is what created this divide between structure and style. Whereas like HTML in the early days was all structure and style, just it had very little style to it. And then CSS is what allowed the style to flourish, and then that separation came about. Now, let me quickly check for questions, because we're coming to an end soon. Yeah, body contains that. Thank you, Jen. So last thing, because we'll do, like next week, we're basically going to look at a page and try and build it and like tweak it. That's what the live demo is for. But what I want to give you the last taste of is JavaScript. JavaScript's a little bit less straightforward to understand than CSS, but just like CSS, instead of using a style tag, we have a script tag. And I've cut a lot of corners in this lecture just to not distract you with things. But inside a script tag is where we write JavaScript. Now there's a bunch of you here who use JavaScript in 1531. There's a really good pre-recording called the JavaScript ecosystem. You should definitely watch it, because what it shows you is that JavaScript's actually a core language, and then like the second half of JavaScript is actually different depending on whether you're using Node.js or using it in the web. So if all your JavaScript learning has been in Node.js, you can probably take like a bunch of what you know, but not everything, and transfer it to the web, right? So it's like here there's a bunch of stuff like, if you remember JavaScript from 1531, you used to do things like this. That doesn't work, things like that. So the language is a little bit different, and I'll give you the most basic example without explaining too much of how this works. Let's imagine that I don't have a black background for YouTube, like this. And what I'm going to do on my page is that I'm going to create a button under that, and that button is just going to say, show me the studio, like this. It's just a button. Button is an HTML property that makes something look like that. If the button's ugly, most buttons you see on the internet are button tags. that then have CSS added to it. For instance, I could add call this one cactus. I could add some styles to this if I wanted to, such as, border radius 5 pixels, background as like an RGB that's like really blue, but still pretty bright, I guess. And like it has no border, and it has like extra padding, and this will just kind of look like that. It's like now it's a different button, So we use CSS to make buttons look like what you might be more used to. But when I click it, also you notice because I remove the style, it doesn't look like I'm clicking that. It doesn't feel like it's being clicked, does it? Like you look at it. That's because the default styles with the background actually had, or the border. Yeah, it's actually the border that does it. When you actually click on a default button, it actually swaps the border colors when you click for you. That's what gives you that impression of like, see how I'm clicking it there? It's probably quite subtle. Like the borders change, gives you that sense of depth. I don't know if it comes through on the projector, it does a bit. But here's the thing, I can write JavaScript to make something happen. It's really quick, it only takes a short second. So what I do is in JavaScript down here, I say I want to get my document, which is the web page. I say I'd like to grab my button. So I'm basically saying take the web page, hone in on the button based on the ID of the button. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to listen for a particular user event on that button. JavaScript's a very ugly language on the web. And I'm going to listen specifically for a click. And when a click is made, I would like to call a function called function. And I'm going to create my function called function up here. And inside of that, I am just going to console log hello. Right? Very straightforward. Well, I mean, it's new syntax. It's still JavaScript, but it's new JavaScript syntax for most of you. And on websites, I can actually right-click and go inspect. And inspect will actually, if I go to console here, I can actually see like the equivalent of the terminal, right? Like if you've done Node.js and you console, it comes up on the terminal. But if I refresh this page and I click this button, that's where it comes up in a web browser. So it doesn't display it on the page. You might think, oh, it came up in the terminal, now it's going to come up on the page. But it actually comes up on like a debugging element. Because, the terminal's a debugger at the end of the day, It's not like a user-facing thing. So it's like other thing we can do is instead of a console log, we can say alert. And what alert does is bring up these annoying pop-ups that these ones? Like, do you want to leave this page? Yes, I know what I'm doing. So that's what the alert does. But when I click it, I don't want to just be alerted. I want to change something about the page. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say document again. I want to get the page. I'm going to hone in on a particular element, which in this case is going to be my rhythm. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to take the CSS I'd like to look at all the CSS properties, and I would like to make the background black. So I'm essentially using JavaScript here to update the page. And now when I click this, it does that. So this is how JavaScript's relevance comes into web development, because JavaScript isn't necessarily like CSS is the language of style and creativity and art. JavaScript's the language of dynamism. It's the language of like what changes stuff. And a lot of what we're doing with websites, frankly, is like building HTML pages, styling it with styling it with CSS, using JavaScript to kind of like on the fly update styles and change colors and stuff. And as we talk about later in the course, using JavaScript to go and get more data from the server. And immediately you can start to understand how something like Instagram works, right? Like you think about, well, Instagram is just like I scroll, and then when I hit like the end of the scroll, it has to load more. That's just JavaScript talking to a server, getting me more data, and then it's just building HTML and CSS in front of me. Like, you understand most of what we're doing for the next 10 weeks now, just at the most primitive level. So that's this little cute demo. Next week, we're going to actually go and try and build something more meaningful, probably try and match the look of a web page. Assignment 1, if it's not released now, it'll be released tonight. I'll sort it out when I go home if it had any issues rolling out. I rolled it out pretty late because I wanted to check some things. Also, just very quickly for everyone here, just before you go, I have to log in, but I'll show you, I'll send a notice about it on Friday, but just be aware, this is particularly for postgrads, with your GitLab repos, when we push updates, maybe there's typos or clarifications, we push them as new merge requests to your GitLab repo, and you have to accept them and merge them in. I'll send out info about that on Friday. It's more just like how you get new info if we make clarifications. Anyway, thank you all. Have a good evening, and I'll see you next Thursday.